Hey copper nerds, you know what's cooler than a terminal die state 1823 Restrike large cent? One that's in a perfect, pristine early die state. They're so much more rare. So I did do a video on these earlier, back in the day when I had even less production than I have now. And not that what I'm doing now is good, but what I used to be doing, painful to watch. What I have here are two really interesting 1823 restrikes. If you don't know the history of the 1823 restrike, we're gonna talk about it in some depth. And as for these two examples, this one here on the left is the obverse die is an 1823 N2. There was only an N1 and N2. The N1's an overdate to 1823 over 22, and the 1823 is the only normal date 1823 large cent, and they are so incredibly rare. But this one is in very early die state, and where there had been a cud, because all examples have a cud, because the dies when they left the mint had a cud, as we'll discuss in more detail. Where this one had a cud, it was very carefully engraved into dentals. What you typically see or saw was that either it had the cud intact or else the cud was just tooled off. I am aware of no other examples of an early unbroken die state where the cud has been converted into dentals through careful engraving. So this is a very, very neat example. Let's take a picture. Let's take a look at some pictures of both of these. So let's take a look at John Wright's The Cent book, where he shows us the 1823 N2, which again, very rare. There was only 2 varieties that year, so date collectors have a really hard time finding 1823s. And it just so happens that sometime in the I want to say 60s or 70s, the N2 obverse die was sold by the US Mint with scrap metal, with scrap steel, and unauthorized reproduction restrikes were struck in 3 different batches by 3 different people. So I'm going to go ahead and just read a little bit to you from the Cent book. So the obverse die is the same one as used on the N2. It was now badly rusted and heavily retooled. The hair and ear are especially crude. The rim is grossly broken up here where that giant cut is. And the obverse is usually bisected this crack here. This one comes later. So, and the reverse is the 1813 B reverse that was used on the Sheldon 293. Now badly rusted, heavily dished, and again, often cracked. The crack goes through here and up to there at the terminal state. And we know what the terminal state is because we can go look at these dies, and I have in fact handled these dies, which is really cool. All right, striking variations. The weights of the planchets vary widely, and my early one is thicker than my later one, usually being around genuine coin weight. Though struck from horridly worn out dies, the striking is generally sharp, producing mirror-like coins with wire edges, as you'll see in the photos. Comes with both dies uncracked and with the obverse bisected, and then that second short crack appears that runs towards the bottom. So it's an R2, fairly common. Several of them were struck. They're usually found nearly mint state because these were struck for collectors. They weren't struck for circulation. and it's listed in this book just for accuracy and commonly dubbed the mint restrike, but it's not. It is a counterfeit struck on authentic dies. Here's the part I find interesting. 49 were struck before the obverse die cracked across. So this one here is one of only 49 that were struck before the dies cracked. And Wright notes he's seen 10 of these examples without the crack, and of those 10, 8 had the obverse rim break tooled off. And I'll show you a picture of one that has the cud tooled off. There are also about a half a dozen that are struck in silver. Those are very rare and they're in the latest die state. Struck sometime in the 1870s. And then Pennywise has covered these restrike dies a couple of times. And maybe I'll grab one of those as well later in the video. So what we have here is a terminal die state. Again, we know they're terminal because we can look at the dies. And let's take another look, if we haven't already seen them, of the pictures that I took of the dies at the ANA. And then in this pristine early die state, again, these dentals were very carefully engraved on this example, and I just find it extremely interesting and unique. It looks so well done to me. You can disagree if you'd like, but I think they did a pretty nice job turning that cud into dentals. So this Pennywise article isn't about the restrike in specific, but it does have some nice photos of the dies. This is actually an article that's about the quality of die steel that was used back in the early days. And these dies are just a great example because, again, they're the only surviving large cent dies that I'm aware of. So pretty interesting, unique situation where we can actually look at the dies, we can see what the terminal die state was, and that's just a rare situation. Oftentimes what was thought to be the terminal die state is later determined to not be because a further progressed example of a coin is found. But when we have the dies, we know exactly what they looked like when they came out of production. Mostly wanted to show you the cud there. I don't know that my photos do quite as good of an example of showing the cud. And also the note that these dies were owned by Jules River. And you've seen that I have River's Sheldon 62 with the big cud. And I also have River's Sheldon 27. So I have a couple of coins that came from his collection. And in that sale, they were supposed to be selling the dies. As well, the federal government stepped in and said nobody can own these dies. You know, their government property should never have been released into the public, and they've been used for counterfeiting. So the resolution or settlement that was reached was that the River family put them on a permanent loan with the ANA down in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And if you go to the ANA museum and ask nicely, I believe they will let you inspect them. I have looked at them as part of their summer session EAC course, but I suspect that if you went and asked real nice and maybe called in advance, you could get a chance to look at them as well. They are so cool. Probably the only chance you're going to have to handle authentic large cent dies that were used to strike US coins, and in this case, the very cool restrike counterfeits. Looks like we have two available on eBay right now. This one's been for sale for quite a while. It has the cud completely tooled off. You can see what that looks like. And I much prefer the dentals that I have on mine. And don't spit on your coin until you get that black spot. So that one is going for, what was that? 1645. I think they used to be trying for a little more on that one. It is the very rare early die state. It is in an ICG MS60 slab. Mine with the tooled dentals, I paid $1,500 for about a year ago. I got it from Chris McCauley over at Early Sense Auctions, and it was in a PCGS AU58 slab. So this is an important note. An MS60 is not a higher grade than an AU58. An MS60 is as bad as a coin can look while being completely uncirculated. An AU58 is about as good as a coin can look with very, very minor evidence of circulation somewhere. Perhaps they dinged it down to an AU for the tooling on the dentals, because I find no signs of circulation. But very confusing concept. Really, like a AU55 and an MS65 are the same coin, but one has some evidence of circulation. So I would much rather have a high AU than a low MS. It's going to be a nicer looking coin, generally speaking. Anyway, I paid $1,500 for my PCGS slabbed AU58 example with the really cool dentals engraved from Chris McCauley at Early Sense. This one seems overpriced to me, particularly with that ugly black mark and with the cut having just been tooled off hastily. The other one that's available, it's got a starting bid of $1,900. It is a PCGS MS63. It is in that late die state. It's got the bisecting crack here and the one that goes to the bottom. Mine was in a PCGS MS62 slab. I paid $1,750 for it, and I got it from Chris McCauley at Early Sense Auctions. In fact, after I got the early die state version from him, I asked him to keep an eye out for a mid and a late die state. He found me a late die state maybe a month later, and I'll touch base with him again, but that middle die state's kind of hard to find. The terminal die state is where most of them were struck. So right now you got two options out there. I wouldn't go for that early option, that early die state option. I just don't like the coin. You may, I don't. But this MS63 1900, that's not far off. Again, it's $150 more than I paid for my MS62. And if it goes for that starting bid or maybe up to $2,000, it seems like a fair deal to me. So that's what the market dictates on those. But if we were to just out of curiosity, let's see what an 1823 N2 would go for. Sort by highest price. See if there's still a nice one out there. Here we go. Here's an N2. It's an AU58, so exactly the same grade that this Restrike was, but this is an authentic N2. And 18,500 compared to 1,500. So the Restrikes are still far more affordable and high grades. Oops, add to my cart. I almost bought it there accidentally. No, don't put that in my cart. Is this a blooper that I should keep in or not? Removed from my cart. I'm good. I'm good with a Restrike. I don't need an authentic one when I got these two beauties for, they're combined 20% of the cost of that one. So that's what the market looks like for these. They're pretty affordable. They're not easy to find, but they're out there. As we just saw, there's two available, one in early and one in late die state right now. If you see one in that mid die state, let me know. I'd like it to be a high AU or a nice MS. I don't want anything with big damage. I don't want anything with those fly specs. I really do enjoy the 1823 Restrike, and that is truly because of the opportunity I had to handle those dies. It's just something different. Being able to actually handle production dies from the US Mint for large cents, it does not get any cooler. If I can take another look at those this summer, I'll try and get a little footage. I'll be back down at the ANA for the second session of the summer session for Early American Copper 2, the advanced course. And I know Copper 1 is where they show off the dies, but maybe I can sneak over there and get a little more info and a little footage for you guys of those then. But that's what I got for you. I just thought I should do a little better job putting together the information on these very interesting examples of counterfeit 1823s that are struck on authentic US dies. And with that, I will look forward to, again, talking to you in the comments and catching you in the next one. Peace.